Hi, I'm Tabitha Soren, and this is the Week in Rock. Trouble-plagued rapper and actor Tupac Shakur is dead at the age of 25, just about a week after sustaining 4 bullet wounds last Saturday night in Las Vegas. Shakur spent the weekend in the hospital on a respirator.
The night of November 30th, 1994, was one of those moments in hip-hop history that would change the culture forever. Tupac Shakur, already a rising icon in rap, was stepping into the lobby of Quad Recording Studios in Manhattan. He wasn't just a rapper, he was a revolutionary spirit wrapped in a young man's body, with lyrics that spoke of poverty, police brutality, and the pain of growing up in America as a young black man. But what happened that night was more than just an attempted robbery. It was the spark of a war, a moment so bloody and mysterious that even decades later, the shadows around it refused to lift. And in those shadows, one name continues to resurface: Jimmy Henchman. Tupac had flown into New York with a restless energy. He was suspicious, edgy, and already caught up in a world of rivalries. Just a few months earlier, he had served time and dealt with court cases that left him constantly looking over his shoulder. He was still young, only in his mid-20s, but he knew the streets were watching him, testing him, and as he stepped into that studio lobby, he didn't expect to find death waiting with open arms. According to Tupac himself, when the gunman approached him that night, he instantly felt betrayed. He had been invited there for a recording session. The way the ambush was set up, he believed someone on the inside had lured him into a trap. Tupac would later publicly accuse people he thought had set him up, but one figure who kept circling back in whispers and street talk was James Roseman, better known as Jimmy Henchman, a man who wasn't just a hip-hop manager, but also a player deeply rooted in the streets. Henchman had built a reputation as someone who could move through both the boardroom and the block. He managed artists, negotiated deals, and made power plays in the music industry. But his background in the underworld gave him a darker aura. To some, he was a businessman. To others, he was a gangster cloaked in respectability. And when Tupac was shot 5 times that night at Quad Studios, the streets buzzed with questions. Who really ordered it? Who set it up? Who had the most to gain? Tupac himself believed the hit wasn't random. He felt it was a message. When he recovered, his paranoia turned into rage, and that rage poured into his music. Tracks like Against All Odds and Hit 'Em Up weren't just diss records, they were cries of betrayal. Lines aimed directly at those he believed tried to silence him. And among those accusations, Jimmy Henchman's name kept surfacing. Tupac accused him outright, pointing the finger at the man he believed orchestrated his near-death experience. But why would Henchman want Tupac out of the way? The theories are as layered as the streets themselves. Some believed it was about money. Others thought it was about power. Tupac was a free spirit, refusing to bend to industry politics, often insulting those who tried to control him. For a man like Henchman, who thrived on influence and respect, Tupac's unpredictability could have been a liability. The shooting itself was brutal. Tupac was robbed of his jewelry, shot multiple times, and left bleeding in the lobby. But the most chilling part of the night was how quickly rumors spread that it wasn't just a robbery. It was a setup by men connected to the music industry in the underbelly of hip-hop, where the line between gangsters and executives blurred. Power was often enforced not just with contracts, but with guns. As years passed, the story didn't fade, it grew darker. Tupac's accusations against Jimmy Henchman became part of hip-hop's folklore. Henchman denied involvement, but the whispers never stopped. Even federal investigations years later revealed ties between Henchman and street-level violence that gave his denials a shadow of doubt. He wasn't just a music manager, he was someone the government would later call the head of a drug empire, a man whose empire stretched far beyond studios and stages. The Tupac shooting became one of the central turning points in the East Coast-West Coast rivalry. Tupac believed New York wasn't safe for him anymore. He shifted deeper into the West Coast scene, aligning himself with Death Row Records and Suge Knight. That alliance only poured gasoline on an already raging fire. The bitterness between Tupac and his East Coast rivals, especially Biggie and Bad Boy Records, turned into one of the most infamous feuds in music history. And in the middle of that feud, Henchman's shadow loomed. Some insiders claimed he was pulling strings, using the chaos to his advantage. Others believed Tupac had simply painted a target on himself by calling Henchman out. Either way, the shooting at Quad wasn't just an attack on Tupac, it was a warning shot to the entire industry about how deeply the streets still ruled hip-hop. Years later, when federal cases finally brought Henchman down, prosecutors painted a picture of a man who lived a double life. By day, he was a manager and industry insider. By night, he was running a multi-million-dollar drug operation, allegedly ordering hits on rivals and using violence as leverage. The portrait matched the whispers Tupac had spoken of long before. It was as if Tupac, even in his paranoia, had been right all along about the darkness that surrounded him. But what makes this story even more haunting is that Tupac didn't survive long enough to see how it all unfolded. Less than 2 years after the quad shooting, he was gunned down in Las Vegas, a murder that remains unsolved to this day. Many point to the East Coast-West Coast War, others to gang rivalries. But the roots of Tupac's paranoia began on that cold night in New York, when bullets tore through his body and trust shattered forever. If you peel back the layers, the quad shooting wasn't just about robbery. It was a political statement in the world of hip-hop, where power was measured not just in record sales, but in street credibility. Tupac had been a threat not just lyrically, but because he refused to play by the rules men like Henchman enforced. For a man accused of running empires from the shadows, Tupac's defiance may have been too dangerous to ignore. The tragedy of it all is how young everyone was. Tupac was only 23. His killers were likely no older. Jimmy Henchman himself was barely past his 30s, already navigating the cutthroat collision of music and crime. It was a world where egos, money, and survival dictated decisions that could end lives in seconds. And in that world, Tupac was a fire too bright to last. Looking back, the Quad Studios shooting remains one of the most debated moments in rap history. For some, it was simply an attempted robbery. For others, it was the first real shot in a war that would take both Tupac and Biggie within 3 years. And for those who study the shadows, it was the night Jimmy Henchman's alleged hand was revealed, even if it could never be proven in court. What's undeniable is that Tupac never let go of that night. In his final years, he carried the anger with him everywhere he went. His music turned sharper, his words more venomous. Every bar was a reminder that he believed he had been betrayed. And when he named Henchman, it wasn't just paranoia. It was Tupac's way of pulling the mask off someone he thought was untouchable. The irony is that Henchman would eventually fall, not from the streets, but from the law. In 2012, he was sentenced to life in prison for drug trafficking and murder for hire charges. The image of the polished music manager vanished, replaced by the reality of a man who had built an empire on both beats and blood. To Tupac fans, it was a chilling validation of everything Pac had screamed about, and so, the story lingers. The quad shooting was more than a crime scene. It was the moment that shifted the balance of hip-hop. It was the night Tupac's trust in the industry died, the night that set him on a path toward death row, and the night that accelerated a war that would consume the greatest talents of a generation. Whether Jimmy Henchman was the mastermind, an accomplice, or simply a name whispered in fear, his shadow remains tied to that bloody night. Decades later, the lobby of Quad Studios is just another place in Manhattan. People walk past it, unaware of the ghosts that linger there. But for those who know hip-hop history, it is sacred ground. It is where Tupac's innocence ended, where paranoia replaced trust, and where the first bullet in a deadly war was fired. And in the darkest corners of that memory, the name Jimmy Henchman still echoes, a reminder that the line between the music business and the streets was never as far apart as it seemed. The story of Tupac's shooting is not just about one man's pain. It's about a culture caught between art and survival. It's about the price of fame when power and violence dictate the rules. And it's about the shadows of men like Jimmy Henchman, whose influence was felt not through records sold, but through lives lost. In that sense, the quad shooting wasn't just an attack on Tupac. It was an attack on hip-hop itself.